My name is George Strake Jr., son of the founder and discoverer of the Conroe oil field, and I am delighted today to share some of my thoughts about my dad in the Conroe area, which has been so important not only to the Strake family but to the whole area of this part of Texas. My dad was born in 1893 in St. Louis. He was the 10th of his mother's 10 children. The first 7 were by Strake brother number 1. The last 3 were by Strake brother number 2. Number 1 having died during the process. And my dad was raised by his 3 sisters. He did not go to high school, but he did took an entrance exam and got accepted at St. Louis University, where he got a degree, and that was during World War I. World War I, he was drafted, and he was a wireless instructor in the Army Air Corps. He fell in love with a lady in Florida that he was dating at the time, and she wanted to get married, but he wouldn't marry her because she had more money than he did. And she said, if I were a young man looking for a fortune, I would go to Mexico. So he did. He went to Mexico, got a job, I think it was with Gulf Oil Company, and he spent that 7 years down there learning what it took to find oil. And so a lot of what he applied here in Conroe, he learned from being in Mexico in the late 20s. And so he took his experience that he gained down there, and ironically, he lived 2 houses. He and my mother at the time, they were married at the time. They lived 2 houses down from the William F. Buckley family, and he used to babysit for the William F. Buckley Jr. But Mr. Buckley, the father, is the one that got the idea to go to New York and get the New York banks to fund Americans who were down in Mexico looking for oil. It turned out to upset the Mexicans so much that they didn't pass a law. They passed a constitutional amendment saying no foreigners could own minerals or surface in Mexico. Ironically, that was just changed just in the past year or so, because the Mexicans realized that if they want to keep up with the world, they had to get international attention to Mexico and exploring for oil in their country. Well, anyway, passing the law that said that foreigners couldn't own minerals caused my dad to look elsewhere, and so he decided he would pick up mother and my oldest sister, Susie, who was born at that time, and they moved to Havana, Cuba, and he was going to lease up the island of Cuba. But to get himself some cash flow, he took on a Huckmobile dealership, and he did not realize it at the time, but Mexico was just beginning into a severe, what they called a sugar depression, because that was their main source of income, is raising sugar cane. And it turned out to be a disaster down there, and he told my mom, he said, we better get out of here before we have to swim back to the States. So they came back through Houston on the way. He was going up to Oregon to go into the timber business, and he stopped here because my mother was from here, and he stopped here so they could visit a while. But my mother's mother took ill, and it was a long, lingering illness. She died about 9 months later, but it was a long time for him. So to give himself something to do, he would go down to the library and study how oil and gas was found, and all of the things he could gobble up about how to go about looking for oil. Well, I think it's interesting to see why he settled on the Conroe area, because this was nothing but sticks and trees at the time, and he found apparently what caused him to stop here and start trying to drill a well is he looked at most of the bayous and rivers will flow into the Gulf of Mexico, but he thought in this area it kind of turned a little bit to the northeast, which gave him some indication that there might be a structure down there that's causing that. And also two other things that he found of interest in this area was he would go in these back palmetto sloughs and different parts of the forest back here, and he would see a sheen of oil on the water in the swamps. He would talk to the farmers, and they said, you know, my cows aren't drinking the water around here because it's so brackish, which gave you an indication might be a salt dome. And he picked up on what people would laugh at today, I'm sure, those techniques. So he started leasing, and he eventually, with the money he had saved from his Mexico days, he started leasing, and he eventually leased about 8,500 acres in this general vicinity. And most of the people that were looking for oil in this area in those days was looking southwest of here, and nobody thought there was a chance of having anything kind of in the southeasterly direction, which the discovery well was from the city of Conroe. When he got enough money to drill the well, he still wasn't through with his problems because there was a service station, filling station that was on the road, which is, I think it was Texas State Highway 75, I think. And it was the one that's now I-45, the international highway. But he went to get the equipment. There was 3 real heavy boilers that he had to have in order to create the steam, which caused the rig to rotate and dig a hole in the ground. And he found he finally found a way to get that done, but he needed somebody who knew what they were doing about drilling, and he was told there was a guy named Harvey Lee who was the best there was in drilling wells in this part of the world. So he looked and looked and looked for this guy Harvey Lee, and I was driving up and down the roads of East Texas trying to find out where he was and so forth. And he was just about to give up, and somebody said, you know, try this road. I forget which one it was. Try this road, and I think he lives back there somewhere. So sure enough, he drove down that road just about to give up on the whole project. And he saw this lady hanging laundry out in her yard. So he stopped the car and he said, ma'am, do you know anybody by the name of Harvey Lee? He's supposed to be in this area. And she turned around and she said, Harvey, somebody here wants to see you. And it turned out that that was his wife in his home where he lived. And so it was the Depression times, 1931, and money was hard to come by, and jobs were even more scarce. But he told Harvey Lee, he said, I hear you're the best there is, and I want to drill a well in Conroe, do you want a job? And he says, I sure do. And he said, well, how much you want? He said, well, how much will you give me? And he said, I'm making $100 a month now drilling water wells, and it's not making, I can't make ends meet. He said, well, okay, I'll pay you $350 a month. He said, does that work for you? And he said, oh, man, does it? Yeah. So anyway, hires Harvey Lee, who in turn gets a crew together, and they spudded this well out. One of the hazards, many hazards that he had in drilling the well, he had to get these heavy boilers somehow on location. But there was a rickety old bridge just south of I-40, what is south of Conroe now, on I-45, and it had a rig, a weight limit on the highway that was far exceeded the amount of weight. I mean, the weight of the boilers far exceeded the limit on that bridge. So they knew they were in some trouble with that situation. So they went down and walked in by foot to listen to cars and trucks coming over that bridge. And he said it was shaking the bridge every time. And the boiler was exceeded the maximum weight that was allowed by about twice. And so they said a lot of prayers and crossed a lot of fingers and got it done at midnight when the policemen who patrol this area usually stopped about 2 a.m. in the morning to get some coffee in one of the little cafes around here. And they successfully got the boilers over, and they got to the location. By the way, one of the things he required in his leases that he took was to go to be allowed to use the standing timber to fire his boilers, which created the steam that turned the rig and so forth. And that turned out to be a big help. But he found that lease form in the library there in Houston, and that's what led him to use that form of lease to get this well drilled. So anyway, they hand spudded the well because the fire chief in this area heard about the well going up, and he came out and he said, "Wait a minute, you've got to put spark arresters on your stack there, because the wood they were burning was having these chips go up and clog up the smokestack up there, and so they couldn't get enough heat to turn the rig." So one of his men on the deal, he said, "Mr. Strake, if you want me to, I will get that done for you, but why don't you go to town and get a bite of dinner?" So one of his ways he fixed the fire spark arrestor was he took his 12-gauge shotgun and shot 2 holes in the top, and well, all of a sudden the fire started bigger and the steam got hotter, and they were on their way. And so anyway, nobody really, they really thought he was kind of crazy for drilling there. And I still wonder really why you would spend all your last penny on a totally wildcat well. But he saw these indicators that made him remember his experience in Mexico, which showed him when they were finding oil slicks and salt water and creek changes and such like that. That's what they were finding oil and gas on in Mexico, and so he applied that same theory here, which is the reason he proceeded on with the deal. But he was a person, when he believed in something, obviously he would lay it all on the table, and as a result of that, he found what was at the time, don't know where it is now, but what at the time was like the 3rd largest oil field, developed into the 3rd largest oil field in the country. And so overnight, Conroe turned from a sleepy little town to a buzzing town, with people coming from everywhere to get jobs, buy leases, get drilling rigs, and so forth. So that is the incredible story about my dad. Obviously, he was a person, when he thought he was right, get out of his way because he was coming at you. So, but he was a very from his mother's side. His dad died when he was 1. His mother died when he was 7. But he apparently became a very strong Catholic because of his mother. She was the one that was imbued in him the Catholic religion, which was a part of his life. And later on, he used the money he got from Conroe and other wells that he drilled around the southern part of the United States to do a lot of good for a lot of people, including places such as the University of St. Thomas High School, Jesuit High School, and so it was an incredible story how he managed to stick to it while things were still. I mean, while he still had some money left, it was a remarkable story, and obviously this whole area has benefited from it. And by the way, the first well, discovery well he drilled, he went to 8 major oil companies trying to get them to drill him a well for a half interest. But every one of them turned him down, and one of them told him, he said, "Mr. Strake, you got too big an oil field for our company," kind of facetiously. And then another thing, it took him a long time to get used to the Texas A&M game, because he thought he had one of the companies that he was talking to talked into going with him. But the guy all of a sudden looked at his watch. He said, "Oh my gosh, I got to get going. I'm going to miss the game tomorrow, this afternoon up in College Station." I think it was A&M versus Texas. So he took him a long time to get over that. But desire to play football almost cost him his deal. One thing interesting happened when he was trying to get together the money to drill the discovery well here at Conroe. Was a person came to him one time with a German accent, and the word was out that he was doing. This was after the discovery well, but this might be a really big field. And allegedly, the fellow came to him and said, "You know, there's a man in Germany that would like to buy your field or buy your oil. His name is Adolf Hitler, and would you be interested?" And Mother and Dad considered going to Germany to meet with him to determine whether he was interested in investing in it. And he said he got a funny feeling about it. He didn't know Hitler or anybody, but he said he just had a funny negative feeling about this guy and what was going on in Europe. And they canceled their trip to go to Germany to talk to him. So whether that ever would have happened, who knows? But it was an interesting sidebar on the journey to get this thing drilled. Another interesting thing, when he drilled this first well, which he didn't like for people to say this, but it was basically a gas well, because they produced, it was just short of 5,000 feet, and it was a small amount of oil, like 100 barrels of oil, and a huge amount of gas that they ended up producing from that number 1 well. But it wasn't until they drilled a second well, and he didn't like people to say that was a discovery well. When he drilled the second well, that's when at, I think, 4,950 feet or something short of 5,000 feet is where they ran into the mother lode and good strong oil field that produced like 5,000 barrels a day at the beginning. So that was another interesting point in their journey to get this thing drilled. Back to the discovery well. Dad was getting real short on times before he had to pay rentals on the acreage he had developed. So they didn't have the facilities to sell the gas, which meant pipelines, or deliver the oil, which also meant pipelines and or trucks. So he made, there was a fella named, let's see, Mr. Moran was his name. And Mr. Moran had a little service station right here on what was then, I think, Highway 75. And so he cut a deal with Mr. Moran, who had a small little cracker plant on the back of his service station property on I-40, on I-75 at the time. And so he agreed to lay a pipeline, Mr. Moran did, to his service station, and he got enough money from selling that gasoline to cars that were traveling between here and Dallas, and it gave him enough money to keep things going. But it was, and Mr. Moran ended up probably, if you could scrape off the top 10 feet of all the soil in Montgomery County, it would be looking like a spaghetti bowl, because he ended up laying most of the pipelines that still do exist underneath the surface in Montgomery County. But it was a fortunate journey for him, and ironically, Mr. Moran's grandson and I are big friends now, both having gone to Notre Dame and become pretty fast friends. There were obviously a lot of people that were involved that probably I never heard of, but the one name that I remembered Dad talking about a lot was Mr. Britt Freeman, and he was a native of the area around here, I think, but he was a big help to him, and you know, telling him who was who here in Conroe and who he needed to see to get a lease from, and what he needed to do and where he needed to go in order to do the mechanical things necessary to get that hole in the ground to 5,000 feet. But that was a name that I was a little kid. Well, it was before my time even, but I can remember when I was real young. That name, Britt Freeman, was really an important name in our family.
He furnished all the wood to operate the ballers.
Yeah, he was the one, as I understand it, that cut the standing timber, and they called, and one of the things that Freeman advised him on was getting a lease that allowed him to use the standing timber on the property. And of course, the place around here is nothing but trees, and that was a very big thing, because it saved him a lot of money being able to cut the standing timber in 6-foot lengths, and they called it 6-foot gas, is what they called it. And they would cut the standing trees down and cut the trunks up in 6-foot pieces, and they called it 6-foot gas, and they would throw those in the boiler, and that's one of the things that was causing the burning chips to clog up the spark arresters. But it was a money saver for Dad, which allowed him to take his precious few dollars that he had left to invest in this deal. And that was, so Britt Freeman was the name we revered at the Strake house. I know that for a long time.